being taught with regular ed in the same class or with a special needs teacher and a regular ed teacher. And we found they weren't getting the material. So once we put them together and they were getting the same material, there's that learning gap decreased significantly. We still have a gap between our special needs population and our regular ed, but it's much smaller than it was even 10 years ago. And that's the kind of, it's really a process, and you also can't look at too much data, as the principals here can tell you, and teachers. Your brain, you get data freeze because you get so much information. It's like, I'm not looking at any of it because I'm looking at too much. So I, as superintendent, would work with the principals and say, let's find data points that we can use and then develop strategies on trying to implement it. Now, resistance, you know, my philosophy, and I'm kind of broad stroking it, is if after a while we have people who don't want to do what's best for kids, then we need to counsel them into a new career, because we're here for the kids. And it's easier said than done, and I'm more than willing to work with teachers that are struggling or don't want to do what's best for kids. But in the end, it's too valuable. Again, treat those children like your own. You can't afford to keep someone on for 2, 3, 4, 5 years who aren't doing what you want. You have to move in a new direction. And it may sound kind of cold, because as an educator, we kind of want to hold on to things, but this is too important. And what I've told my principals was that, especially with new teachers to the district, if after 2 years you have any doubts, we don't renew them. They don't come back for a third year. Because in Rhode Island, after you get your third contract and you get a fourth one, let me rephrase, after 3 years, once you get 3 contracts, you get tenure, and then it's a lot harder to remove someone. So what we did was, we're just not going to waste any time, because it's too important of a decision. So we had I call it Bill's 2-year rule. If after 2 years you're not doing what we want, we'll go in a new direction.
Thank you.
I think people who are my age, or even a little younger, maybe they were, you know, raised differently. They went to school for different programs where this was not the norm to have the tests that we have today. And so I think there were a lot of people who were reluctant to, you know, they said this too will pass, and they weren't going to buy into it. But I think today a lot of those people have retired, and we have a lot of young people who are being educated that this is the way it's done. And so I teach for American International College's graduate program, and I supervise student teachers and people who are going out to be principals. And so a lot of that I see today when I'm going out and watching student teachers, it's really amazing what they can do, and what they know these things are expected of them. So it's not even as if I were in my own district and I'm watching them and they're, you know, thinking, well, I got to put on the dog and pony show because she's here. These are people who, you know, who know these are the standards, this is what you have to do, and that assessment is part of the game. And they're all into formative assessment and summative assessment in their classes too. So I was very encouraged because, you know, quite frankly, a lot of my colleagues back in the day were not thrilled when the testing came in, and they really didn't expect it, because in Massachusetts particularly, they had 1 million different tests, and before MCAS came in, you know, just they were going to try summative assessments for the state, and they always went by the wayside. So they figured this too is not going to last. But I think today's teachers, you know, are really, that's the way they went to school, that's what they learned. So they know this is the way it is, and they know it's good for kids, and they know that getting that data is going to help them with their instruction. So, you know, I think a lot of times too, it's helped the special ed population, because with inclusion in particular, everybody owns those students. And so teachers are saying, you know, they're not saying, oh, that's your problem, or they're not in a different classroom all the time. So they're feeling that they need to work with these students. They need to be willing to do what it takes to bring those students up to standard and to make sure that they are closing the gap between the regular ed students and the special ed students. And I know we still have a lot of that, that has to be worked on. And, you might have some people who are reluctant and they think that I'm not going to have to do that. But I think a lot of them have retired. And I think that we have a lot of people today who are, they're kind of being competitive about the scores that their students achieve. And they want to make sure that their scores are really, some of the best scores. I'm going to move this away from my mouth. I think it's. So I think that they realize that this is what people are going to be looking at. And I think it's not cutthroat competitive, it's collegial competitive. And so people want to help each other. They want to figure out what worked for you that didn't work for me, or what kind of, what have you been doing? And so I found a lot of people sharing. And that's one of the, I think, the great benefits of assessment, because people are doing some peer observations. They're sharing their craft with others, and when I was in Holbrook, that was one of the things they did really well. They went into others' classrooms and they saw that, somebody did something, and they said, do you mind if I copy that? And of course not. And there was no written curriculum there. So they really were teaching whatever they wanted, kind of similar to what you were saying. And so we got together and, people started writing the curriculum, and they really enjoyed doing that. And they enjoyed sharing the activities that were going to go with the curriculum, and so we got some new materials because of it, and people were, and I was saying this in another interview, that it was kind of, in one case I was thinking I was in Stepford land, because they were all doing the same thing on the same day at the same time. If I watched from one classroom, it sounded like the same exact lesson. So that was maybe a little bit too prescribed, but I think they got into making sure that they were meeting the standards so that kids didn't have any gaps, and that everyone got the same curriculum all the way across the system. So bless you, I think that's really important, and I think that people are, they're kind of excited about, this is your craft, and this is what you're going to do to make kids achieve better.
Can I just add, when we talk about assessments, we did in Tiverton, because our principals met with our teachers, and they would have once a week grade level meetings with the principal, and they would talk about how students were progressing. We would also have district-wide grade level meetings that were held quarterly, so all the teachers from first grade would come together. They'd all be together. We didn't have them all at the same time because we didn't have enough subs. So half a day we'd have one half of the first grade teachers together, then a second half, and we would be looking at the assessments together. I know at the middle school they have common planning time where it's a little more natural because they have the time built into their schedules to do that. But we would do that at the grade, at the school level, but also at the district level, because we want to support teachers in getting the students to where they need to go. Again, those that are resistant, I do agree that when I first started, all my friends that are now retired, I'll pass. But you still have, unfortunately, or at least maybe it's a Rhode Island thing, we still had teachers that were resistant to not teaching to the test, because also the assessment is just that, it's an assessment of what your students are teaching. So part of what we had to do was kind of reframe how teachers thought and say, you're not doing this for the state, you're doing it for the kids, you're doing it to make what you do better. So you could be more of an effective teacher. And over time that changed. You'll always have a few holdouts or people who don't want to do what you want. And that's kind of where I ended it, was at some point they either fish or cut bait. But that's only after a long process of working with the teachers, explaining to them what your goals and objectives are, and trying to get them to where you want to go.
Thank you. We have one more question. I'm going to limit it to 2 minutes per person. We're way over on time. Some of this we've already touched upon anyway. How will you assess the district's current level of performance and staff effectiveness? Dr. Lally?
So I would like to visit classrooms, and I think that's the only way you can tell what's really going on in the classroom is to go in and, not in an evaluative way, because I think people, get a little bit concerned about that, but to go in and see just what's going on and see, if there are some issues that maybe could be improved by, sharing practices, I would want to see that. And because sometimes there's all sorts of reasons why that could happen, that someone might not be performing the way, someone's students may not be performing the way that others are. But in my experience when I was in Holbrook, we found a woman that I thought was never going to make it, and I said this in another interview too, that we thought she was going to be, I was ready to pull the plug after the first few months. And instead we brought in a coach who was one of the faculty members that they felt comfortable with. And she was a great teacher and had great expertise. And she went in and worked with that teacher. And after a few more months, I was like, oh, I'm gonna go back in there. It was the most impressive class. She became a master teacher for us, and she was going, it was just amazing. So, I think that's one of the things that we really need to see is, can we, get some coaching into a classroom, and because there are so many fantastic teachers and that know so much more than I do, and I think that they would be the best resources to go into classrooms, and you have those people on your own staff. And that's what I found in Holbrook, is that why would we be going to find somebody else to bring in who could only be there once in a while? This person, and you have these people, I know you have a math lead teacher coordinator who goes into classes. I think we need to do more modeling and more coaching, because we do a lot of evaluating, which I think is necessary, but I think we need to do more of that practical piece so that people feel comfortable and can ask questions. Because a lot of times, I know when I was a new teacher, I didn't want anyone to, question what I did, because it's like, oh, that means I'm doing something bad. So I think we need to make that an open discussion where people feel like they can talk about things with these coaches, and that people can get the right feedback so that they can improve practice in the classrooms. And that our, exemplary teachers can be the ones to model this for other people. And I think we can make that happen. I know I went into a classroom and taught first graders French one day, so that a teacher could go and observe somebody else, and it was my fallback was French. So, and the kids were hysterical, they loved it, and they would always greet me with bonjour and everything else when I walk into the building. So it was good for me. I felt pretty good, because they remembered a few words. And it was great for the teacher, because she could go and observe someone else. So I think there's a lot of things we can do to make this work, and to make sure that everybody feels comfortable with what they're teaching, and that everybody is performing at a very high rate.
Thank you.
Could I just have the question real quick again?
Sure can. How will you assess the district's current level of performance in staff effectiveness?
First, I think I touched on it before. I talked to my principals, get their input. I would want to meet with the teachers, as I talked about, in an informal setting, be voluntary, have them come and tell me what they think is going on, what their strengths are, what their needs are. Teachers want to talk, just like both of us want to talk tonight, and everyone's going, oh, when are they going to stop? But teachers want to talk. They want to, because you work in isolation, unfortunately, because you've got your kids, you've got your class, the four walls, and unfortunately you don't have as much collaboration as you'd like. So I would do those two things, but then I would also, and I've done this for the past 10 years, I do walkthroughs. There's a formal protocol for walkthroughs. When I say walkthrough, I mean, I either do it with the principal. I always tell the principal I'm coming into the building, because whenever the boss is in the building, special codes go out. So-and-so's in the building. And just really see for myself, informally, and again, it's snapshots, they're not formal evaluations by any stretch, but you do it enough times and enough grade levels and enough schools, I've developed an understanding of what was going on in my 3 elementary schools and what was going on in my middle school. And you could give me a teacher's name after a while. Yep, that's Mrs. Smith. She's great in science, with the lab and all the lab work they do. Or Mr. Johnson in math. Yep, I've seen him teach math. He's great at teaching Algebra 1. But that only comes from actually being out there, watching what's going on, seeing for yourself. And again, it's not easy as superintendent, because you're pulled in 22 different directions all the time. But through those observations, through talking with the teachers and the principals, we would develop, you know, a plan to improve what we do, because we're short on time, and I'll leave it at that.
Thank you. Okay, we're going to wrap it up right now, and we're going to bring Dr. Lally down to the music room and Mr. Rarick down to the media center. You guys can go into those rooms and collaborate with them for the next half hour or 45 minutes or so. Thank you.